our last panel for the evening. The moderator is Dr. Jyoti Bajpai. The panelists for the session are Dr. Lalit Mohan Sharma, medical oncologist from Jaipur. Dr. Geeta K, surgical oncologist from New Delhi. Dr. Sailesh Bondadi, medical oncologist from Nasik. Dr. Sandeep Batra, medical oncologist from New Delhi. Dr. Bhavesh Parekh, medical oncologist from Ahmedabad. Dr. Ahmed Iqbal, clinical oncologist from Sri Lanka. And Dr. Rajendra Baral, clinical oncologist from Nepal. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kashish, and thank you everyone, especially Senthil, for keeping everybody alive after this very interesting discussion. So in next few minutes, we shall be talking about the last case scenario, which has been provided to me by Amish. And thank you, Dr. Amish, Dr. Sudeep, Dr. Parekh, and everyone for giving me this opportunity. So this is a 50 years lady, postmenopausal, just attained. And she is clinically T2N0 lesion, a biopsy suggestive of IDC grade 2, ERPR positive and HER2 new negative. And patient after underwent the BCS, the final HPR is suggestive of T2 lesion, node negative, PR 7/8, PR 0/8, and HER2 new negative. She is LVI positive and KI 67, 13%. So patient agrees to underwent an Oncotype DX testing, which is suggestive of an intermediate score. After this, patient refuses to take chemotherapy. So my questions to my panelists, maybe we can start with Shailesh Bondare. How much time you actually would prescribe genomic assays in this kind of case or in general in your practice?
Can say around 1 to 2 patients in a month, but in I have at least for Oncotype DX I have suggested, but no one has really done an Oncotype DX for mine.
Right.
So maybe we have found out another way of doing it, the Indian version of it. Yes, few patients have agreed for it, and we have started doing that.
Right. So, but in this kind of case scenario, you would agree that you would go for a genomic test.
Yes.
Right. So then I will move to Lalit Mohan.
Yes.
So do you agree with Shailesh? Would you prescribe the genomic test in this kind of scenario or in general also?
If finances are not a barrier, definitely yes. But sitting in my own clinical practice, hardly I prescribe these tests. Right. Because of the logistic reasons.
Right. So if for time being we will forget that there are logistic constraints, then you would go with it. So in case you are choosing a test, which test? And your preference is based on what factors?
Again, the Oncotype DX has been the most popular and well discussed, with some good points about the and controversies about the intermediate type. So still Oncotype DX is most popular, which we prefer till date.
Okay. So now Dr. Bhavesh, are you here? Dr. Bhavesh Parekh?
Yes, madam.
Yeah.
I'm here.
So can you please tell which test, if you will decide to do a test in this kind of a scenario, which test you will prefer and why?
Madam, here the catch point is that patient is 50 years. This is very a catchy point, whether because the most of the Oncotype DX is more than 50 years. Now, and again, you just mentioned the postmenopausal is just attained. So whether it is really a postmenopausal, I will go for FSH, LH or estradiol to know the real menopausal status. And if at all everyone or I agree, here the point is that patient is agrees for Oncotype DX and patient is refuses for chemotherapy. So as far as from my side, if I will convince, then I will definitely go for CAN assist. That is also an Indian version of Oncotype DX, where I can also have a real scenario, like rather than intermediate score, I will definitely have low or high, and I can decide whether chemotherapy should be given or not.
Okay. So I'll move to Dr. Baral. Your take on this. Which test and why? Dr. Baral is here?
Ma'am, Dr. Baral is not here.
Okay. Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Iqbal Ahmed?
I'm here. I'm here, available.
Yeah. Can you please provide your opinion? So these are the various tests in the literature and in the practice as well, and there are various differences. So which test you would suggest for a patient, and why? Which factor you will take into account when you're deciding?
Yeah, in Sri Lanka, actually hardly do this oncotype DX except one or two patients. As you mentioned in the case scenario, she's 50 years attain menopause. Then we need to confirm it's really menopause or not. But she's refusing chemo. That actually we need to do gene assay. Preferably oncotype DX we choose.
Okay. So this slide was showing the data, and we can make a note that these are the various tests like Oncotype DX, MammaPrint, Breast Cancer Index, EndoPredict, and ProSigna. Apart from that, there are some Indian version of tests also available, but these are the tests which are having the most robust information or data available. So the type of information provided in all is about the prognosis. That is a 10-year recurrence risk. However, Oncotype DX as well as breast cancer index are predictive as well. Although Oncotype DX for chemotherapy benefit, while BCI for endocrine therapy benefit. So there are various indication in various guidelines, and there is two big trials also, especially with Oncotype DX and MammaPrint, which have shown a utility. But what could be the clinical practice points? So specific indications we cannot offer it to all. What should be, where should we really decide? And do our guidelines suggest that one test is superior to other? So this question is for Dr. Sandeep Batra.
So, so if I go by the points that you have put indications, so first and foremost, known negative patient who is specifically known desirous of continuing with chemotherapy. As far as superiority of one over another is concerned, I would say it's more of the logistics plus the data like Oncotype X most for the postmenopausal, since our patient in this case is menopausal. I will go for a MammaPrint for a vital gene analysis. If finances are not a constraint, can we perform two tests to be more assertive?
So, first two questions were for you.
Okay.
The next question I will ask to another.
So
you feel Oncotype DX is, in your practice, you would prefer to do Oncotype DX. That's what is the message?
If postmenopausal, then Oncotype DX. If it is perimenopausal, like in this case, then I will prefer a MammaPrint.
MammaPrint, right. So now again to Shailesh. If finances are not a constraint, can we perform two tests to be more assertive? There is still some doubt when it comes to intermediate. If we do it like in this case, can we do two tests? And will it be fruitful? Shailesh, are you there?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. If that is an issue, then I think MammaPrint, adding MammaPrint will be giving additional informations, especially as per the Mind Act. You can also have a clinical assessment along with the gene assays.
So one test wherein the clinical assessment is also a factor, or two tests?
I would be more comfortable where I have clinical as well as gene risk assessment.
So one or two? One. So you feel even if the money is not a constraint, then also you would not want to do two tests. That's what I should take, or there's something different?
So, I mean, given a choice of the two, I told one. But if the finance is not issue, then let's confuse more and get two done.
Okay, so you prefer to get more confused. Well said. So anybody else from the panel, do you agree with this notion, or you want to say something different?
Yeah, we can go for only one. This MammaPrint is usually do 70 gene signature. I think it is better than doing the two tests.
Okay.
So I would like to say that, your
yes, Geeta.
DX, so if under the age of 50, if you have a clinical low risk and you have a Oncotype DX score which is less than 16, less than 15, so then then there is a case for you to probably omit chemotherapy in that subgroup, because this has been specifically defined in the less than 50. Otherwise, less than 50 is a gray zone if you look at it in that sense, that chemotherapy benefit does accrue to women under the age of 50, but in a specific group where there is a low clinical risk and there is a low oncotype DX score, then you're probably justified in not giving that patient chemotherapy.
So Geeta, would you prefer, if finances are not a constraint, would you go for 1 or 2?
So we have to, it only adds to the concordance. And if there is a concordant report, you're more comfortable. But we do know there are situations when there is a discordance. And if there is a discordance, then you really don't know what to do if both your tests come back as discordant.
But Dr. Geeta, where is the data for the concordance?
So if you look at CanAssist, they do claim that there is an 80% concordance for whatever subset of patients that they have done. But I am sure there is more validation that is required for CanAssist. So if you look in terms of the years of follow-up, so probably Oncotype DX has got the most robust data.
No, but the thing is that the concordance is with another genomic test only. So whether we really want to do 2. So anyway, in the interest of time, I will move.
I don't think there is a head-to-head in that sense. If you would not find enough evidence to support 2 tests.
Okay. So now one more question, then we'll go with the what is the data in this regard. So shall we perform in patients where it will affect the management decisions essentially, or we can perform otherwise as well?
We should do only when the management decisions will affect. This is very important as far as our setting is concerned.
So in this situation, patient was very aversive to chemotherapy. So if in the beginning only patient declared that I will not take chemotherapy come what may, then whether we should prescribe or not.
Why to do it?
So do you feel that to support her decision, we can still go with it? Or especially if it is a clinical high risk, or no? Or it is a big no?
This is a T2N0 and this is a 50 years.
No, so, I'm saying in general, if it is, if it is not going to affect the decision, whether you wish to go still or not.
No point.
No. Decided, made up her mind. I don't think an Oncotype DX is going to change her mind. It is only going to make her 3 lakh rupees poorer.
Right. So the data is.
I think when you have a high risk, it is your duty to counsel the patient that your risk score is high and try to help the patient by making her change the decision. I would still go.
I also agree with Dr. Sandeep that usually in our clinical practice, we only guide the patient. Patients 99% times they trust us that whatever you suggest, we'll go for that.
Sure. So I agree with the house that there is some this particular point there is some conflict, and that's all the beauty of it. So essentially, genomic testing is only indicated in patients with hormone receptor positive and HER2 negative tumors. Those with up to 3 positive nodes in various tests, the indications are like that, and it should generally not be performed for patients with hormone receptor negative disease with more than 3 positive nodes and HER2 positive or TNBC outside the context of a clinical trial. It should generally not be performed in patients for whom the test results will not affect the course of the treatment, but it is generally at times if there is a clinically high risk and patient is kind of refusing, we can check that whether it's a genomic low risk. So at least we will know that if patient is adamant, it cannot take chemotherapy, just do not want to, perhaps it is falling into genomic low risk, so the decision is right. But it is not a hard criteria. The guidelines currently do not imply the superiority of one genomic test over the other, although Oncotype DX and MammaPrint, the data is most robust. There is discordance between available genomic tests is expected because the different tests are developed and validated across a range of patients, population and treatment backgrounds. So performing more than one genomic test on a patient should be avoided as uncertainties in risk management may result. But if you really want to add to confusion, as Shailesh said, this is an area. So then this patient goes for radiation. So now my question to the 2 clinical oncologists in the panel, no, I think one only, Dr. Ahmed, what is your preference in your practice, TBI versus whole breast, and for this particular case?
We can go for whole breast radiation.
Okay. So what is the data for PBI in this kind of?
But APBI is because the outcome is very small advantage than a whole breast.
Okay, Dr.
It's
Geeta, you would like to comment upon this?
So in a very good subset of patients, especially the elderly, where you have a small tumor, ER/PR positive, HER2 negative, we have used APBI in those patients with interstitial brachytherapy, but it's not commonplace use. We don't use it in everybody.
Right. So there are various guidelines for to whom we should, give partial breast irradiation versus whole. And as my panelists rightly pointed out, that this is a very select group of population, although the various guidelines also vary when the criteria are concerned, but more or less there's a select good risk group wherein perhaps that data is emerging and it is suitable. So post radiotherapy patient was offered AI. So now my question here is from Dr. Lalit Mohan, that how you choose between AI versus tamoxifen, and are there some predictive markers to decide superiority of one over the other?
So this patient is post-menopausal as per my remembrance. So
Just
AI,
attained menopause, 50 years.
yeah, so AI will be the choice in this patient.
Okay, and are there some predictive markers to decide, or you every postmenopausal patient you would go with that?
If the patient has got some comorbidities, like patient has got weak bones or some patient on steroid therapy, other comorbidities, then we prefer tamoxifen. Otherwise, those who are fit patient with bones normal, many times for such fragile, we do bone density scan also. So if everything is normal, then in postmenopausal, AI remains the choice.
Dr. Shailesh, you want to add to something?
No, I agree with Lalit. Especially the bone health is something which we keep a watch on. And invariably, we have seen more and more patients, almost every patient complaining of joint pains.
Yeah,
Those patients on AI. And we follow them for the bone health and treat them with bisphosphonates or denosumab for the
Right.
bone health.
So yeah, we will come to that later. But so do you advise to do a bone density scan in all patients before starting AI, and how frequently you repeat?
Ideally, yes, but practically, I don't get it.
Difficult. Okay. So these are the predictive markers for endocrine therapy, and although the list suggests various markers like ER, PR, HER2, proliferation effect, BCL2, ER beta, MTA1, cyclin E, intratumoral aromatase, genomic signatures, and ER1 mutation. Essentially, hormone receptor status is the only predictive factor with level 1 evidence for endocrine therapy. And no biomarker can actually help decide between TAM versus aromatase inhibitor. And this is the EB-CCTG data. So I would like to ask Dr. Bhavesh to comment upon this data. There is some increment, some small benefit, which is from aromatase inhibitor. Uh, so which strategy and which drugs you would like to use in these patients? And is it all-time aromatase inhibitor or sometime, and how you choose and which strategy?
I will definitely select that aromatase inhibitors for 2 to 3 years, followed by tamoxifens, or vice versa, like tamoxifen, because again this particular patient is 50 years, so tamoxifen for 2 to 3 years and then aromatase inhibitor. So rather than only 5 years of aromatase only, I will see that combination, because again the bone health and calcium or the joint pain is the also important issue. So I will, with this particular data, I will use tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitor in sequence.
Dr. Sandeep, do you feel that because the toxicity not overlapping, part of them are overlapping but not all, so that's why choosing a sequence or two agents is a big advantage?
So my practices for postmenopausal will be only AIs, no tamoxifen, unless until there is a exact contraindication for using AIs. I will extrapolate from the text and soap where we are deliberately changing the premenopausal to postmenopausal status to give them the benefit of AIs. So I think for me, it is not the sequencing, it is the continuation of the AIs throughout the course of adjuvant therapy.
Okay, Dr. Ahmed, what do you do in your practice?
In our practice, this is actually attain menopause. We can 1 or 2 years, then we can switch to aromatase inhibitors because if it's because the bone health is not an issue late because AI is causing more osteoporotic sort of a bone problem. But in our practice, usually we give in this sort of scenario tamoxifen followed by AI.
Right. So this slide is showing the estimated bone loss with AIs in different strategies, and these are the other complications, prominent complications with various endocrine therapy. So what about cognitive functions? Do we have a difference in both these therapy with regard to cognitive function? Very important. Dr. Geeta, do you want to take this?
Well, normally I don't see this particular aspect of, although the patients would say that, they have trouble remembering things and the other bits with endocrine treatment also. But I'm sure our medical oncologists see more of this because, when they see them in outpatients. But I also want to comment if it is postmenopausal, once we say it is menopause, once we say it is 1 year of, there is a definition for menopause. So then there is no confusion. It has to be AIs. But let us not write off tamoxifen also because, try as much as you would, 20 years since the AIs have been around, but you've not been able to show a survival benefit of AIs over tamoxifen. So I don't think you should write it off because, quality of life is important. If
Absolutely.
a
So your
patient
point,
has
point
arthralgias and
right.
myalgias and is not able to deal with it, then you need to take that into account also, and then probably you've been served well by tamoxifen for a pretty long time now.
So certainly both the drugs are important, and that's why we are discussing here that which aspect of one drug is better in what respect, and the medicine is fluid, so there will be different thought processes in different panelists. So that's how we will come to a consensus after all the controversies. So Dr. Lalit Mohan.
Yeah, look, Jyoti, in fact, in practice, many times it is confusing because patients have a lot of problems, especially those who are on AI. So they have a lot of problems. So whether they are because of the postmenopausal by nature of the age or because of the OFS or other ovarian function suppression, it becomes tough to identify whether the cognitive functions are impaired because of the treatment or postmenopausal status.
Right.
But honestly, we don't see most often we don't get evaluation also properly.
Right. So you're right in the clinic. So often we don't, we forget to really concentrate on these aspects. So, and surprisingly, TAM was found worse than AI with this aspect. And this was found in Big 198 as well as in team study. Important to note. About compliance and cost issues. So how does AI fared in this respect? My question to Dr. Bhavesh.
I am definitely most of the patients are compliant with the aromatase inhibitors. Again, cost issues nowadays, there was no much difference about the tamoxifen and the AI. Even sometimes practically I feel that tamoxifen is not available. So sometimes I feel that AI is much better as far as the compliance and cost issue is there.
Dr. Sandeep, your comment on this?
Yeah, I agree totally with Dr. Bhavesh. Many a times I face difficulty in getting tamoxifen for the patients because of the cost issues. Many companies are not manufacturing it. Moreover, the cost has come down drastically, and the quality of life issues along coupled with the cost. I think if the patient can be made to go through for 3 to 6 months on the same therapy, the bone pains and the quality of life issues, they come back to same as like a tamoxifen.
Jyoti, can I Jyoti have a point here?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the compliance is really a big issue because we want to call these patients repeatedly for next 5 to 10 years, and most patients and families, they find trouble in getting the person for routine checkup from long distance. So we face this problem of poor compliance. So at my center, I have started a project where it is a breast cancer recurrence prevention project. So we are offering them tamoxifen and anastrozole free of cost. So all the the test plus the consultation plus the drug, everything we are offering them free, so that at least with that free ship they keep coming for regular follow-up.
Right. So there are, certain aspects which we need to really focus, and when we methodically actually check these aspects, they look more, prominent. And with AI, there are certain kind of problems like earlier initiation of lipid-lowering drugs or antihypertensives and aspirin to reduce cardiac and cerebrovascular events. Maybe early initiation of medication for osteopenia and osteoporosis, pain medication for arthralgia, and routine follow-up for lipids, blood pressure, etc. And also the routine assessment of bone mineral density and preventive therapy need. So these are the aspects for tamoxifen. There is we need to be vigilant about the endometrial side effects, cognitive dysfunction, as I said, and thromboembolism risk. So we have to really see an individual patient as an individual. As Geeta rightly said, both drugs are important. We cannot directly write off there is some incremental benefit, but potential toxicity is also very important. And at present, we are doing a study for compliance with endocrine therapy in Tata Hospital. And very soon we will be able to provide the data with each of these drugs. And the preliminary thing, it's looking that with AI, it's little more troublesome to continue, because many a times patient they miss the dosages, which is falling essentially into compliance definition, and we often forget to ask that in clinic. So many times they don't take therapy so regularly as it is warranted. But this is interesting aspects what we discussed. So about the duration of endocrine therapy, um, and what is the clinical practice. So maybe we will start from Dr. Ahmed. Do you give extended endocrine therapy to all patients, or how
Yeah,
is it
now,
like?
yeah, now we have started extended duration of therapy. Those days we used to give 5 years. Now we almost extended 10 years. We have started to practice.
Okay. Dr. Shailesh, do you have some criteria to whom you will offer, or do you give it as a blanket?
So AI for 5 years, tamoxifen, if node positive, I give it for 10 years.
Okay. Dr. Sandeep, you want to comment on this? This is the data for 1, 2, or 5 years of tamoxifen, and more than half of all breast cancer recurrences and death occurs post 5 years of tamoxifen.
Yes.
So that is important. But do in clinics we offer to all patients, or only to the patients who are of sufficient high risk?
I think the second statement that you said, for sufficient high risk, not to all patients of early breast cancer.
And what is the definition of sufficient high risk in your criteria?
So I would say if the ER/PR positivity, we get the report like 70% or 80% receptors, if it is something like less than 50% with a high Ki-67 index, these are the patients who will be considering for a higher duration rather than limiting to 5 years of tamoxifen.
I also prefer 10 years, in fact, if possible, in such high-risk patients rather than 5 years. And after around, say, 4 years or so, I keep making them repeatedly that we will continue for 2, 3 more years or 3 more years, like that.
So do any of you wish to use genomic signatures for determination of late relapse risk in endocrine therapy, and how does it go? Shailesh, you want to comment?
No, I have never done it and I don't know.
Anybody from the house want to take this?
Not after 5 years of tamoxifen or AI or whatever, you would not be doing a genomic assay. I mean, at least we don't practice doing a genomic assay midway through the treatment to assess whether she's going to require more endocrine therapy.
But upfront, when you are prescribing endocrine therapy that time?
So if it is a high risk, like if it's a node positive with other high risk features like Sandeep just mentioned, then you would counsel them for extended hormonal treatment. But
Right.
if it is a low grade, ERPR strongly positive, HER2 negative, node negative, why would you want to give her
Right.
10 years of hormonal?
Right. So with these are the clinical criteria which are very important. There is some data which suggests that BCI test also provide a prognostic BCI score for the risk of cumulative and late distant recurrence, and a prediction of the likelihood of endocrine therapy extended based on the BCI, HOXB13 and interleukin 1 7BR gene. So this is the data which suggests that this can be used, but of course in practice we don't use it as a routine. So these are the trials designs for extended therapy, and meta-analysis on 5 or more years of adjuvant tamoxifen suggests that EBC TCG summary that 10 years versus 5 years, there is relative benefit of around 15%, absolute benefit of around 3%, and increase in mortality of around 0.4%. And there are higher incidence of some side effects like hot flashes, vaginal discharge, fluid retention, thromboembolic events, etc. So how this data looks to you, and you want to stick to high risk population only, entire house, or somebody wants to say that this data is so convincing that you can even move even if the patient is not so high risk?
Only for high risk, and still as other panel member also agrees that we are not doing practically all this genomic testing. I am also a part of the Atlas trial. Atlas trial is also the pioneer in deciding whether adjuvant tamoxifen longer against Salter. Again, we had a problem about the compliance, and there was not much bigger benefit about extended adjuvant tamoxifen.
Absolutely. So but the point is well taken. Does menopausal status having a role or some interaction to decide? So this is the MA17 data. Somebody wants to comment upon this? Dr. Lalit?
No, I think we usually go ahead more with the clinical aspect, and I always feel that we get only one chance of treatment in India. So we need to be more aggressive, and it is rather better to over-treat these patients rather than under-treating, especially with safe drugs like hormone therapy, if the patient is well tolerating this without much side effects.
Okay. So in this MA17 data, the woman who had been premenopausal at diagnosis experienced significantly greater benefit of extended letrozole in terms of DFS. And there was significant interaction between treatment and menopausal status was found. Something interesting. So I have put this because our patient has just attained menopause. So now we'll move on to this. So as Shailesh advised for DEXA density scan the osteopenia at all the sites. So now I would like to ask from Shailesh only that you already answered the first question. So about the second question, that do you prescribe adjuvant zoledronic acid or denosumab in these patients, and how you decide?
Actually, I don't do DEXA, but I gave either zoledronic acid or denosumab, depending on the financials, to almost all the patients on AI. At least I advise them, and 80 to 90% do take. At least zoledronic acid they take. Few of them do go for denosumab as well.
So if finances are not a constraint, which one would you prefer? And
denosumab. Denosumab.
Denosumab you prefer. So why?
Most important thing is convenience, no admissions. It's a subcutaneous injection, 60 milligrams every 6 monthly.
Dr. Bhavesh, you agree with the Shailesh? Or you?
Now, madam, again for denosumab generic like Intas Pharma also now comes with the denosumab. So I am definitely go for denosumab adjuvant. As rightly Shailesh told, my most of the patient, and even I explain or I at least tell that to do a DEXA scan. I think only 20 or 30% of my patients are doing DEXA scan, but definitely I am on AI, my patient on AI, I will definitely give denosumab.
Okay, so denosumab versus zoledronic acid with respect to skeletal related events or for superior oncologic outcomes as well. I wish to talk about the ABC, SG, and DCare data in this regard about the oncologic outcomes. So
it's mainly for the skeletal related. It's only for the bone health.
Okay, but
so I think Jyoti, can I make a comment
here?
Please. Zoledronic acid has been said to be effective in prevention of the bone mets as well, because it has some osteoclastic regenerative activity, leads to sort of good environment for the mets also to develop in the bone. So there have been few good thoughts about zoledronic acid in prevention of metastasis also.
And what about denosumab?
Denosumab, I could not get convincing data. In fact, the DCare article also suggests that it has not been probably found to be.
Dr. Sandeep, you want to add here? Skeletal related events, denosumab is better. That is, House is convinced about the oncologic outcome. zoledronic acid has some data. Is that data convincing all across or in some specific population? And what about denosumab?
So first thing, skeletal related events only with the bone metastasis, not in the adjuvant setting. Second thing, whatever limited data with the zoledronic acid has is not convincing. And now that is proven with the denosumab also, that we don't have a convincing evidence for a improvement in the OS with the denosumab in the adjuvant setting. So for the sake of convenience, for the sake of decrease in the prices, for the sake of decreasing OPD visits or the admissions for the zoledronic acid, I would be comfortable prescribing denosumab with a 6-monthly dosing.
Okay.
Actually, the end point of denosumab DCARE study, I think, was development of bone metastasis and not overall survival. The primary endpoint.
So I'm coming to here. Why there is a controversial data between these two studies, ABCSG 18 and DCARE? In one study suggests that denosumab is, good data. So this is the the data from ABCSG, and about the DCARE, which is wherein rather a higher dosage of denosumab was given more frequently in a higher risk population. There is no benefit in DFS which could be found. So your comment on this, Shailesh?
So actually, I was a part of DCARE study, and we used to give it was a double-blind study, and for the first 6 cycles, every time patient used to take chemotherapy, she used to go for a shot of denosumab versus placebo, and then later it was given.
No, so I want to specify. Sorry to interrupt because we are running out.
Yeah.
So why there is a difference between these two data of denosumab versus DFS with regard to DFS?
I think one is development of bone metastasis, and other was skeletal events, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So skeletal events may not be because of bone mets. It could be just a fracture, which could be because of osteopenia.
Right. Geeta or Lalit or Dr. Ahmed, anybody wants to comment on this? The controversy regarding these two trials?
No comments, please.
So essentially, the population in ABCSG 18 was very relatively low risk, wherein primary tumor around 2.1 centimeter, less than 2 centimeters, 72%, node negative 71%, lower grades 81%, and only 18 of these 287 disease-free survival events among the 1,700 plus patients enrolled in this placebo arm of ABCSG 18 were histologically verified distant metastasis. So there is some doubt, some concerns regarding that what they have defined as DFS events, and they have defined not only the metastasis, but they have defined second primaries, deaths due to any cause, all those events also as the in the DFS data. So that perhaps diluted the thing, and since this finding was not confirmed in the larger adjuvant denosumab DCARE study, there is concern regarding that ABCSG 18 data is most likely a chance event that will perhaps not till now not reproducible in another trial. So I agree with the house that denosumab halves the rate of fractures on anastrozole. So perhaps we should offer it for this purpose rather than for DFS advantage. For zoledronic acid also, so far the data is suggestive of is that in postmenopausal women it is showing an advantage, and in this population also there is a subgroup analysis from various studies which has shown an advantage. So the robust data is yet to come, but whatever benefit from bisphosphonate seen is it in this group. So now we'll move the similar profile of lady.
Jyoti, we have 1 minute left. I think you have to summarize.
Okay. So in last Geeta, I would ask, I will not show the thing. What about in metastatic situation, the role of primary surgery? You can comment upon the Tata study as well as the ECOG-ACRIN study and your take. This is the last thing. Geeta, are you there?
So what we need to define is whether there is this metastasis that we're talking about is just oligometastasis or just any metastasis.
Any metastasis.
So if you look at the Tata study, it is any metastasis. So if you're looking at, and even the Seema Khan study, which she's just recently presented in ASCO, does say that there is no improvement in disease-free or overall survival if you were to do local treatment, and in quality of life also if you were to do local treatment. But then, we should not go back thinking that all oligometastasis should also be put in the same basket. But in oligometastatic disease with younger women, with favorable immunohistochemistry, even for HER2 positives, there is a role for surgery in such patients, but not, maybe the only subset which is not going to benefit in that situation is also probably the triple negative breast cancers.
I think you have summed up really well. So I think we have covered all the questions. And so these are the take-home messages. Tamoxifen is essential. AI provide a small additional benefit, and there is difference in toxicity profile. There are no predictive markers to discriminate between these two drugs. 5 years is the minimal duration for all patients. And in patients with sufficiently high risk, we should consider extended adjuvant. Optimal duration for the individual patient is essentially unknown. And best strategy for extended adjuvant 10-year tamoxifen, 10-year AI sequence sandwich is also essentially unknown. And the patient sitting across the chair is the most important. We have to individualize all these decisions. Genomic test, there is limited benefit in select groups and there are cost implications. So we have to decide judiciously. Denosumab, there's limited oncologic benefit. However, there is good benefit in reduction of fracture risk with AI. In zoldronic acid, essentially benefit is in postmenopausal women. PBI, there is evidence in very select group where it can be practiced. For MBC, local treatment do not have a proven role in disseminated metastasis. However, in oligometastasis, there is role and we have to again individualize. With this, I would like to end and I would like to invite all of you for an upcoming event, which is on 30th October till 1st November. It is an annual meeting for Immuno-Oncology Society of India. And I promise there will be an academic feast with this. We already have 15 international speakers, which are immuno-oncology lead from world over, including Professor James Ellison, who has actually discovered the CTLA-4, and he was offered the extreme honor Nobel Prize for this discovery. So thank you very much, and I end here.
Thank you so much, ma'am.